In Genesis chapter 16, there's the sad story of Hagar. Hagar was the slave of Sarah, who was the wife of Abraham. And Sarah was unable to have kids. So she gave her slave to her husband Abraham to bear kids on Sarah's behalf. Now, that sounds really weird to me, but apparently that was a custom at the time. But Hagar had no choice in this. She was a slave, so she was a victim of this circumstance that was forced upon her. But she became pregnant. And then she made a bad decision. The Bible says that she despised Sarah. So I guess that means she either lorded over her or made fun of her or somehow boasted that she was pregnant and Sarah wasn't. Anyways, there was a conflict. Sarah became very angry. She became very hostile to Hagar. And Hagar, the situation was so bad, she ran away and then was out in the desert. And she was, of course, not going to survive out in the desert by herself. And when she was out there in this very desperate state, God sends an angel and reassures her, comforts her, gives her instructions, and tells her that the destiny of that child would become a great nation. And then Hagar makes an incredible declaration. She says, "You are the God who sees me." Hagar realized that she was never alone. She was always being watched over. God loved her and saw her desperate state and came and rescued her. So then she went back to Abraham's household. But then in Genesis 21, there's more conflict in the household. Lots of bad decisions, terrible relationships, and eventually it becomes intolerable. And Hagar and Ishmael are expelled from the family, and they're out in the desert, and they're going to die of starvation and thirst. And in fact, it says how that they were just desperate, and she was crying, and then God sends another angel to reassure her, provide water, and remind her of the great promise for Ishmael's future. And it showed that through all these terrible circumstances, God was watching over her and blessing her and protecting her. So if you look at Hagar's life, she, first off, was the victim of other people's bad decisions. And then second, she made a lot of bad decisions herself that made the situation so much worse, she actually became homeless twice. But in all of those messes, God was still watching her, protecting her, following her, and rescuing her. Now, have you been the victim of other people's bad decisions? Have you been the victim of other people's sin against you? Have you made bad decisions that you regret and you're ashamed of? Do you actually feel that God's abandoned you, written you off, punished you, and that you deserve it? Have you felt a bit like Hagar? Well, you need to realize what Hagar did. He sees you. He's following you. He's watching you. He loves you. He wants to pour out His love upon you. And there are no circumstances that can block you from His love. God's love will find you. And right now, today, if you're feeling like Hagar did, you need to realize that God is reaching out to you. He wants to pour His love into you, but open your heart to Him. He hasn't written you off. He hasn't abandoned you. He hasn't left you. And He wants to connect with you at a heart level if you will let Him in. And if you really want to be free, you actually need to forgive the people whose bad decisions have affected you. Forgive the people who sinned against you. And forgive yourself for your bad decisions. You're the hardest person to forgive. You need to forgive yourself for any part that you've played to make the situation worse. And then receive His love. And just see yourself being wrapped in His arms. And He says, "I forgive you and I'm setting you free." And that's His message for you this week. If you feel like Hagar, He is the God who sees you and He can't wait to pour His love over you. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in this situation like Hagar? Have you felt injured and hurt and separated from God? How did God meet you? Just leave your testimony in the box below this video because it will encourage other people who are in the middle of it right now. And if this is your first visit here, you need to get my free self-assessment guide. And to do that, just subscribe to our weekly email newsletter by filling out the subscription form, which you can access by clicking on the link below this video. Join the transformation movement. And I'll talk to you again next week, but this week, let God love you. You are not alone. He sees you.